Louis Fles. Levie Jacob Louis Fles, 19 October 1872 – 24 May 1940, was a Dutch businessman, activist and author. He is best known for writing and broadcasting against Zionism, Nazism and organised religion. A self-described freethinker, Fles was a vocal supporter of humanism and Jewish assimilation. His relationship with the Dutch Social Democratic Workers' Party was more problematic. While he generally supported the ideals of socialism, he wrote extensively about his disagreements with the party as well. After a life filled with personal tragedy and devotion to political and social activism, Fles committed suicide in May 1940, only a few weeks after the German occupation of the Netherlands. Family life. Louis Fles was born in Moslies, Netherlands on 19 October 1871 to Jewish parents. His father, Jacob Levie Fles, worked as a diamond cutter, and his mother, Sart van Bladestein, ran a hosiery shop, placing young Louis squarely in the newly expanding merchant class. After his father died in 1873, his mother married a man named Swab. Upon his mother's death in 1878, Louis was taken in and raised by his stepfather's family. As a successful business owner himself, Swab took the young Louis into his company shortly after the boy had completed primary school. On 13 August 1896, Fles married a Provan station in the city of Rotterdam. They had 6 children: Mina, Rosanne, Henriette, Clara, Barthold, and George. Barthold became a successful literary agent in New York City in the United States. George worked as a translator in the Soviet Union during the regime of Joseph Stalin. In 1938, George was arrested as a political dissident due to his Trotskyite sympathies. Upon hearing of George's arrest, Louis travelled to Moscow but was unable to find his son before his visa expired. George died in prison in 1939. Around this same time, news arrived from the United States that daughter Rosanne had died shortly after giving birth. Fles was widely known as an opponent of Nazism when the German army occupied the Netherlands in May 1940. Even so, it was a shock to many of his family members when, on 25 May 1940, Levie Jacob Louis Fles committed suicide by means of pills acquired from a pharmacist in Capelle. He was buried in Amsterdam in Zorgvlied Cemetery. Business. Fles began working in his stepfather's office shortly after completing primary school. Soon, however, he went into business for himself. He gave lessons in French, English, and German before passing the accounting examination. This allowed him to become a bookkeeper for the Bank of Amsterdam. With these experiences as a foundation, Fles soon founded his own company. Fles and company had many interests, all related to serving the needs of other businesses. These included advertising and publishing, as well as the import and sale of high-end German-made Adler typewriters. The addition of a highly successful line of office furniture helped the company expand and establish branch offices throughout the Netherlands. The rise of Nazism in Germany presented both moral and practical problems for the importer of German goods. In 1933, Fles published the brochure Hitler, Hervormer of Misdadigher. Hitler, reformer or criminal, in which he called for a boycott on the importation of all German goods. Fles sold his business and retired in 1934. Writing. Fles' earliest published pamphlets is in the modern book-cutting plots for Het Koppelboek. Can Koppelboek serve a function in modern accounting? 1918 and efficiency 1922 were both related to the world of business. However, Louis Fles is better known for his extensive writings on politics, religion, and education. As early as 1917, De Groene Amsterdammer printed his criticism of the way Social Democratic Workers' Party SDAP allowed churches to influence the Dutch educational system. In this article, he accused the SDAP of having sacrificed children to politics. Later writings continued to criticize both political and religious authorities. In Kalenderhervorming, Shabbat en Kerk Calendar Reform, Shabbat and Church, 1930, Fles first observed that clinging to cultural and religious practices that set Jewish people apart from the surrounding Dutch culture served to feed the anti-Semitic narrative of Jews as foreigners. He then went on to propose alternative activities families might engage in, such as visiting a museum or other educational pursuits, and admonished his reader, "Dafür te denken, dare to think freely." He expanded upon these ideas in Water en Vuur Water and Fire 1931. Religion, Fles wrote, was as antithetical to socialism as water was to fire. Here Fles repeated his accusation that the government deferred too much to religious, particularly Catholic authorities, especially in the area of children's education. In 1933 Fles used a pseudonym, Dr. W. Bottomacelsis, as to publish Hitler, Hervormer of Misdadigher. Hitler, reformer or criminal. Here Fles enumerated and described the treatment of Jewish people under the Nazi regime, and declared that every relationship with Germany in the area of commerce, art, science, sports and traffic should be discontinued, so that Germany is economically and otherwise crushed. Fles would later put this sentiment into practice. He sold his business that depended largely upon selling imported German merchandise, and, in 1936, served on the planning committee for the Olympiad under Diktatur, the Olympiad under dictatorship, which served as counter to the Summer Olympics being held in Berlin. Additionally, Fles carried on correspondences with other leading thinkers of his day, including an extended debate with Jaime Pollack regarding the nature of socialism in Fles' determined opposition to Zionism. Fles felt himself to be Dutch, and saw Zionism as further separating Jews from their non-Jewish Dutch neighbours while reinforcing the image of the Jew as a foreigner. Instead, Fles favoured assimilation into the cultures in which Jews found themselves. He endorsed mixed marriages to accelerate this process. Fles gathered many of his thoughts from this correspondence into the 1939 pamphlet Wikipedia's Zionism. Down with Zionism. Broadcasting. Fles became involved with Freethinkers Radio, or more VRR, Freethinkers Radio Broadcasting, which had been established in 1928 as an outreach programme of the Freethinkers Association de Dagerard de Don. In 1929, the newly established Dutch Radio Broadcasting Control Commission labelled the group's material as subversive and began to monitor its broadcasts closely. Fles' radio speech Los van de Kerk Free from the Church was banned altogether, and many other broadcasts were censored for their subversive content, although they later found an audience in print form. In 1933, Fles challenged the secretary of the Radio Broadcasting Control Commission regarding the lack of support VRO received from the government. He pointed out that the 1930 census had shown that the number of unchurched citizens had risen sharply, and, since this was VRO's intended audience, it should receive commensurate support. However, in that same year, broadcast content restrictions were sharply tightened and, in 1936, VRO broadcasting license was revoked. However, documents from the organisation show that Fles was elected to the VRO General Board, showing that the organisation continued to work toward regaining the right to broadcast. The Olympiad under dictatorship. When the 1936 Olympic Games in Berlin were declared off limits to Jews and other groups that the Nazi government deemed undesirable, Fles was among a group of Dutch businessmen and politicians who organised the Olympiad under Diktator, the Olympiad under dictatorship, both to showcase the artists of the Netherlands and to protest the policies of the Third Reich. Organisers of the exhibition included Fles' friend and correspondent Jaime Pollack, as well as other left-leaning Dutch leaders. The committee made it clear that their exhibition was as much about protesting the Nazis' manipulation of the arts and sciences for political purposes as it was about showcasing Dutch excellence. Artists from neighbouring countries and even German artists who had fled the Nazi regime were invited to participate. The initials of the name itself spell out D-O, or D, or death in Dutch. The travelling exhibition opened on 1 August 1936 amid much controversy. In Amsterdam, the use of public buildings was prohibited, and in Rotterdam, the show was closed down after only a few days. 19 works were considered by the Dutch government to be too insulting to Hitler and were removed from display. The German consul himself characterised the event as sheer provocation, showing that the committee's effort had not escaped official German notice. Many of the organisers and participants went to prison or were executed after German forces occupied the Netherlands in 1940. In 1996, in celebration of the 60th anniversary of the the Amsterdam Municipal Archives allowed a number of the works from the original exhibition to be displayed at the Sports Museum in Berlin, Germany. Published works. Is in the modern bookkeeping plots voor het koperboek. Can Koperboek serve a function in modern accounting? 1918 efficiency, 1922 calendar reforming, Sabbath and calendar reform, Sabbath and church, 1930 main and word on operabian I. Morrison my answer to Chief Rabbi I. Morrison 1930 de Schal bekentenis van der Estap the confession of the Estap 1930 water in voor water and fire 1930 one onderwid zonder godsdienst education without religion 1932 open brief on den Heer J. F. Ankersmit T. Amsterdam open letter to Mr. J. F. Ankersmit Amsterdam 1930 to Hitler, Havommer of misdadiger. Hitler, reformer or criminal 1933 in verboden radioreader, Los van de Kerk forbidden radio speech, free from the church 1933 godsdienst, open by school en Zionism religion, public school en Zionism 1935 Wikipedia's Zionism. Down with Zionism, 1939,